Welcome to the Faith Forum, a series of talks with leading thinkers, best-selling authors, business leaders, philosophers, artists, and theologians of our time. We're so happy you've joined us, and we hope this podcast offers food for your spiritual journey. From Christ Episcopal Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, I'm the Reverend Chip Edens, and this is the Faith Forum. Hey, Susan.
Hi, Chip.
Well, Susan, welcome to the Faith Forum and to Christ Church. How are you this morning?
Much. I'm great. Thank you for having me today.
Well, thank you for coming and showing up all the way from San Francisco on a Sunday morning. That's a huge deal. Well, welcome everybody to this Faith Forum. We're going to be exploring, are you ready for this? Stage, not age. One of the realities is that we are wired to think about life in just a few stages. We learn, we earn, and we retire. And the notion of retirement, of course, has a kind of mythic quality about it, that once you get to a certain age and you retire, that your life is just perfect. We almost kind of worship that notion. It's our deepest longing to finally get to that moment. But what happens when you get to that moment and all of a sudden there are all these internal pressures, all these new feelings, new emotions? What happens when you get to a place when you don't really know what you're supposed to be doing, how to find meaning, how to find purpose? Well, Susan Golden has been exploring just this topic for many, many years. Dr. Golden is the founder and director of the DCI X initiatives at the Stanford Distinguished Careers Institute. She engages experienced professionals who are focused on the next chapter of their lives, on building innovations for both social and economic impact. These chapters include issues of longevity, economic inequality, energy and sustainability, and impact investing. She currently serves as a mentor in residence at the Techstars Future of Longevity Accelerator and as a thought leader and partner in pivotal ventures for initiatives on innovations for caregivers and older adults. She herself was a DCI fellow. We'll talk more about the Distinguished Careers Initiative in 2006. And she's previously been a partner at Schroeder Ventures, a firm that specializes in life sciences and healthcare. And she's worked at Gentech, and she holds a doctorate in science from the Harvard School of Public Health. Susan, welcome to the Faith Forum.
I'm delighted to be here today.
Could you tell us, before we get into this incredible research that you've done, could you tell us about your journey in thinking about not age, but stage in your own life?
Sure thing. I started my career in public health and was a professor and went into the health policy world, and then found that academia, as much as I enjoyed learning and being with students, just moved a little too slowly for me back then. And so I went to the private sector. And I often say back then it was called selling out, and today it's just called pivoting. But learned an enormous amount how a company solves important healthcare problems. So I joined Genentech, which was a baby biotech firm back then. And it was a wonderful learning opportunity, how you build innovation and how you solve problems, but in a faster speed that we often can't do in academia. And that was a great opportunity for me to learn a new language, the language of business. And in fact, during my time at Genentech, I was had the opportunity to go back to Harvard for what they called a mini MBA, the 3-month executive program, which was great vocabulary. And from there, I happened upon an opportunity to join a venture capital firm. And so I entered a whole new stage. I went from an academic stage to a private sector stage to then to an investment stage. And that was one of the most exciting jobs you can imagine. But I wound up having children during that period, and this is before Zoom, and I wound up taking a career break. And that became another stage. I just didn't recognize it as that. Like many women, I thought I'd go back to my career of some sort after the youngest goes off to kindergarten. That's what a lot of women were planning in my cohort. Then at that same time as my kids were getting more independent, I had a widowed elderly mother who started declining. And I wound up in a caregiving role, never calling myself a caregiver. And I imagine many people who are joining us today don't. They think of themselves as daughters or sons. or parents. But many of us, not turns out there's 53 million of us who are unpaid caregivers in the United States right
Mhm.
now. And at the end of that stage, which I didn't understand was a stage, I thought about the frustrations I had in navigating the US healthcare system for my own mother and the broken elder care system. And I became really passionate about, like, I've got to do something about this because if it's like that for me, I speak English, I have this doctorate in health services. I couldn't navigate it for my own mother and felt so sad about, the pain and suffering she went through what's like for other people.
Mm.
And just at that time, Stanford was starting this new program called the Distinguished Careers Institute, founded by the former dean of the medical school. And he imagined what he was going to do after his deanship and was thinking about getting a doctorate in history, which was one of his passions. And he thought, well, if I'm thinking about what to do next, there must be other people thinking about what to do next in their 60s and 70s and beyond. And this turned out to be one of the great gifts in my life. I got accepted into the second cohort, convinced they weren't going to make me because I had a career break. And to my good fortune, what Dr. Pizzo told me is everybody's going to need a career break because if we're going to have 100-year lives, we're going to be in transition multiple times. And I had had many transitions, but they were difficult ones because I wasn't part of a community. And it turns out the good fortune of being at the Stanford Distinguished Careers Institute and the other programs that are like this right now around the country is you're part of a community. And I'm so excited to hear that your community is thinking about the Center for Wellbeing and creating new ways of imagining our next chapters and stages of life. So while I was at the DCI, I realized there were people in my program that were from their 50s all the way to their mid 70s and beyond. And we were all in the same stage of life. It didn't matter what age we were. We were all rethinking our purpose, our life priorities, what we wanted to do next. We had all had different chapters in our careers that we really loved, but we wanted to do something else next. And it's hard to do that alone. And the
Mm.
beauty of what I went through at my fellowship year and what I think you're trying to create now in your community is you have like-minded people who are reassessing. We have 100-year lives ahead of us. And
Mm.
instead of this being something to be feared, this is something to be look forward to. And if you know you're going to have an extra 20 or 30 years of good health, what would you like to do with that? Why stick all at the end? And why not think about spreading it out throughout the lifespan? And how can we help the next generations think about the 100-year lifespan as this most amazing gift that's been given to all of us? My own father died when he was 64. I just happened to be a teenager, but that was life expectancy for somebody of that age, born in the year he was born. But now, life expectancy has increased by 30 years due to amazing public health measures, medical care advancement, chronic diseases being able to be treated. So for most of us, with the unfortunate, tragedy of COVID, which has reduced life expectancies these last few years, most people born today can has to think about the gift of a 100-year life. And those of us who've reached age 65 in good health, over 50% of us will live well into our 90s. That's a new paradigm. It's something that's very exciting to think about.
Completely. Let's just go right into more of your research because I think I was really blown away by a lot of these facts, and it created in me a sense of urgency to deal with just this question. And so I want to, at the end of your presentation, I want us to really spend some time thinking about how we actually move into that so-called fellowship season of life. Why don't you go ahead and share some of your slides and we'll
Okay.
go through your material and I'll ask you some questions along the way.
That sounds great. So this all came together in a book that just got released this past June by Harvard Business Review. And so I'm going to quickly go through some of the concepts that are in the book, but I know Chip has bought copies for many people and it's available.
Yep,
Uh,
they're free and they're upstairs, and I know they'll be gone here shortly. So
okay.
jump into them.
And the intent of the book is to help everybody think about their own longevity strategy and how to get organizations and companies to think about a longevity strategy. Because if we are living these 100-year lives, we would need to be planning for it and taking advantage of it. And so I often ask people to take, a poll, and I'm not there, unfortunately, to be with you in person, but to think about at what age do you think you're going to live to? And that helps frame a little bit about, what you want to do when. But these are some of the common answers, and it varies by audience, but just wanted to give you a framework how to think about it. One of my parents lived to their 60s, another lived into their 90s. I'm planning for 100 plus. I'm doing everything in my power to uh, plan for that. And it turns out what helps is not just what you think, which is the wellness practices, but community, spirituality, purpose have an enormous role to play in helping your longevity.
And
Um,
Susan, before you leave that slide, let's go back to it again. I want you to know that I was told when I was growing up that you would be lucky to live to be 72.
yeah,
That was sort of the age, and for women it was 78. I mean, that's what they said in
yeah.
the 1970s.
And it's absolutely true. That's how Medicare got set to age 65. That's how Social Security did, because average life expectancy was into the 60s. So nobody imagined people were going to be living an extra 30 years of life. So that's why everything in society has to be rethought. Every consumer facing industry, our educational system, our housing system has to be reconsidered from a 100-year lifespan. Um, so I don't know what category you think you're putting it going in. I'm planning on 100 plus. Chip, I know you are as well.
I'm
Um,
all
but what's also important is perceptions about age. And at what age do you think someone becomes old? And it depending on how old the person is responding to this question, the answers will vary very much so. And there's a great video through maybe one of our learning sessions next year I can share with you about when you bring older and younger together and how they define old. But often people in any of these buckets are stereotyped as the same. Everybody over their 60s could be frail, elderly, or declining, or you could say 70s or 80s. But that is the myth of what's going on now, because there is great diversity in aging. And somebody in their 80s could be as vibrant as somebody in their 40s. I don't like to say 80 is the new 40. I mean, I don't think that's fair to everybody. But to lump everybody into one bucket of as frail, elderly, and declining, picking any of those decades is really a disservice to um, our communities. So we've mentioned that this is a fact that babies born today are going to live well into their hundreds. And that means a lot for financial planning, educational planning, housing, everything you can think of that was framed around a three-stage life no longer makes sense. And if you're, as I mentioned, in your 60s and good health, you have a great degree of optimism ahead of you for living well into your 90s. With health span, we're looking for not just lifespan, living longer, but living with wellness along the way. And so, as people, part of the longevity literacy is that we're going to be living longer than our grandparents. Most people don't know how to plan for it. And you can't plan for it alone. You need a community of like minded people to help think about what you want to do in resetting your life priorities and what comes next. But 10,000 people right now are turning 65 each day in the United States. In just a few short years, people over 65 are going to outnumber those 18 in the United States. And modern aging, for the first time, is being recast as a vibrant opportunity, not just a problem to be solved. I'm sure you've heard terms like gray tsunami, silver tsunami. Um, this is not the way to reframe aging. It's the imperative to live longer life with dignity and meaning and purpose. But we're going to need an enormous amount of innovation to support that concept. Um, but every individual, and I hope you'll leave today beginning to think about what will you need in your longevity strategy. And one of the most important things is what you're doing today, which is lifelong learning. We often call this long life learning, but education in 20 years is not going to last you for a 60-year career span. And you're going to now need a 60-year education span, where, as in my own life, I was in and out of education at different times in different fellowship programs, going back for a mini MBA in my 30s. It will matter to continue. And even though I went to DCI 6 years ago, I'm planning on being a continuous learner for these stages going forward.
I'm going to interrupt that because that's a big.
Sure.
So to go from, say that again, 21 years of learning or 20 years of learning. Did you say 60 years of
Yes.
learning? Yes.
Yeah. And it won't be every day. We start education around 5 and we end in our mid 20s currently. but it means going further. And because things are changing so rapidly, you will have to be upskilled. Your employer may do it. You may choose to do it on your own. You can imagine these 529 plans that a lot of people use for their children for educational purposes will be used for your own purposes
Hmm.
as well. And we're going to need policies that support using retirement savings for educational opportunities. But there is no way a career that I had just in my 20s and 30s could have lasted me into my 60s. Think so much had changed, so much had evolved. And that's why I was so fortunate to be able to go back to the university for a year and continue to learn in many different ways. But we're also going to need financial wellness practices. Chip, you touched upon the concept of wellness. There's many dimensions to wellness. Um, so we will need, individual wellness that will factor into sleep and nutrition and strength training. But we're also going to need financial wellness practices. We're going to need digital literacy practices because being digitally literate today doesn't mean you're going to be in 5 years or 10 years. And digital literacy turns out to be one of the most important ingredients to
Hmm.
healthy longevity. But most significantly, and I think this is what we're going to get into the meat of in our conversation, you're going to need a purpose and you're going to need a community. And a lot of us have found purpose in different times through our careers or through raising our families. And in each time, we've had different communities. But like many people, when you leave college, you have to start a new community and you're in a transition. If you leave at your job, you have to find a new community. And the gift that you all have by being part of the Faith Forum and your Christ Church is that you have community and you can do many amazing things together to support each other.
Can I ask you about the digital literacy? I mean,
Yes.
we speak a lot about sleep, nutrition, stress, various things like that. But digital literacy is something many of us feel like we're already far behind. How does that factor wellness going forward?
So you're going to need to be digitally literate in order to do your banking, to order your food, to get your transportation, for your learning. We all learned how to use Zoom a few years ago. We didn't think we could do it, and we may not have been as fluent as we wanted to be early on, but we all learned, no matter what age we were. Digital literacy in other countries is taught for free to everybody over 50, not just once, but every year, multiple times a year.
Wow.
Denmark does this, Singapore, Japan, Israel, and in the United States, it's just taking on. Google just started a new initiative with the ARP and the Older Adults Technology Service to offer free digital literacy to underserved populations and women in particular. We all are going to need to be digitally literate. We can't all rely on our children. They roll their eyes at us too often. So we're going to need that kind of training. And your community could be a center for digital literacy and bringing intergenerational learning in because the younger absolutely know this better than all of us, faster. They're engaged with it, but it's something we're going to need to be a continuous learner about. I'm always learning about yet another platform. If people, I know how to use Zoom fluently, but when somebody brings in something else, I have to kind of get up to speed on that. But it's doable. We might learn differently than somebody younger. We might need to be taught differently. As I'm sure you all know, there are different learning profiles. Some people are visual, auditory, tactile, but it's doable. And it's a myth that older adults can't learn technology. But this is the key to a successful aging. So just wanted to share that with all of
Very
you.
helpful. Thank you.
Something to go forward on. And I just want to also mention those of you who are working or are on boards or are going to think about starting a new company, which I hope you will, because there's a new terminology about this called sidepreneurs and olderpreneurs, that every company is going to need a longevity strategy because the largest growth in the workforce are people over 50. And 25% of the workforce will be 55 in 2 years. You're going to need strategies for your multi-generational workforce. There are going to be 5 generations in a workforce. Most companies don't know how to manage for that yet and prepare for those transitions. You're going to need to help your employees understand the impact of their 100-year life. They're all going to need career breaks. Nobody wants to work 60 years straight. And career breaks are going to be an important stage of your life, which I'll talk about in a minute. And it turns out the research has been done by Mercer and other groups that mixed age teams can be more productive than same age teams. And when you have a mixed age workforce, you can design better products for a multi-generational use. How can somebody in their 20s design for the needs and wants of somebody in their 80s? But if you have somebody working in your company in their 80s, you can design with them instead of just for them. And all of you can be an entrepreneur in this area because you've already seen, I wish I had X. When I was caregiving, I didn't know about any of the products and services that were available that are now available. And if only somebody would have marketed to me. But often companies don't market to the daughters who are caregiving or the sons. They think they're trying to reach the end user, which is a big mistake because it's more of a family decision often in caregiving. So I just want to give you a framework that there's a tremendous opportunity ahead that's been estimated to be a $22 trillion worldwide market. So that every company isn't thinking about this and every entrepreneur and innovator isn't thinking about it is a missed opportunity. So as Chip has mentioned, we were all raised on the learn, earn, retire, three-stage life. But if you retire in your 60s and you have another 30 to 40 years to go, that just doesn't make sense. You might want a career break. You may want to transition to some other portfolio of opportunities, which I want to talk about. But it's now time to be thinking about the multi-stage life. So there's great diversity, as we've discussed, in adults over different age brackets. We're going to be living many new stages, which we're going to be talking about today. I've created 18 stages for a framework. Not all of us will go through all 18 stages, but it's very different than a very rigid three-stage life that we're going to need to design products and services for this life course. And we're going to need to market to stage. And I'll tell you about some companies who have done that quite successfully. And very interestingly, just this past year, many of you may have a LinkedIn profile. For the first time, you can indicate on your LinkedIn profile that you've taken a career break and list what you did during that career break. It could be education, it could be rejuvenation, and it could be caregiving. And for the first time, I now list caregiving on my LinkedIn profile because I was able to take a career break. I was able to restart a career, and now I've launched a new career. And for many years, women were told to hide it. If we took time out from the workforce, it was like we failed. And now men and women are going to be taking multiple career breaks in a 100-year life. And I really commend LinkedIn for recognizing that career break is a new stage in life to be considered. But we also have, this notion that everybody is the 18 to 34-year-old demographic is where businesses target us. Yet most businesses don't understand that 53% of all consumer spending is by those 50 and older, and 47% of all wealth is owned by those 50 and older. So we are an enormous power source for the economy and for innovation in that we control a lot of the spending going forward. And I often bring up some images of stereotypes of how marketers think about older adults, and I'm sure you've seen that. But this is one of my favorite images because it shows that people have so much vibrancy at different stages of their life. And instead of just thinking about products that help the frail and elderly, think about continuous learning products, think about returnships, which I'm going to be telling you about, chances to try out new careers at different stages of your life. Think about navigators to help you with all these different transitions for someone like this woman. And words are going to matter. We don't have the right vocabulary to capture what we're all doing as in these new stages. Traditionally, people have been called seniors or elderly, and none of us feel that in our 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s. And that's why I asked early on, at what age do you think people become old? And these are just some of the words that I've collected that I've seen out there. And they're all getting at the idea that there's more vibrancy as you get older. It doesn't all have to be about the end, about retiring, about being elderly. It should imply wisdom and maturity and a gift. So if you come up with a new word, and if that's one of the circle groups that you start at Faith Forum, that would be wonderful to helping create new vocabulary because words matter. And it turns out that very much impacts ageism that we often experience. So we're going to need these new frameworks and these new mindsets. And I'm going to tell you about one that I've come up with. And these are just some of the words that I've come across. And I made up some words that that to help capture where we are. And the one that I came up with in conversation with my friends, I became an obnoxious person at every cocktail party I went to. I kept asking people, "What do you want to be called now?" And the word that came up in conversation was furtherhood. That we're in a stage of not elderhood or seniorhood. We're going further, and we're looking forward to what's next. And I hope you might embrace that. So what I came up with, and Chip and I are going to chat about this, is how to think about life instead of three stages as having multiple stages. And if you could divide those multiple stages into quarters, and that's funky math. I studied math. There are only four quarters in a business calendar or often in academic calendars. But I put in a fifth quarter because we really don't know what the 100-year plus life looks like. I just read that the oldest person in the United States just turned 116 the other day. So looking at, we don't have that large a sample yet to know what people are going to be doing in their hundreds, but we should start thinking about it. So we all can think about and relate to a starting quarter that's somewhere between ages 0 to 30. That's when we're starting to learn, walk, go to school. We might be starting a career. And then imagine that somewhere in your mid-20s to your mid-50s, you're in your growing quarter, and I'll talk more about that. But the one that I'm most excited about is what I call the Renaissance quarter. This is the one where this new gift of life of extra 20 to 30 years is really could be added instead of just at the end. And then at some point, we'll all hit our legacy stage when we're planning for our end of life. And that could go anywhere from 75 to 100 plus. But this extra quarter is this sweet spot. This is something that's new in our society, and we need to start thinking about how we might want to plan and capture for it. So here are some of the stages that you might be going through, and I purposely pulled out the ones that you're going to repeat at different quarters. Everybody's, as we mentioned earlier, we had that discussion, is going to be learning over a 60-year life course, and you're going to be a continuous learner. As soon as you finish your education, you're going to need to put that on your bucket list, and it's going to repeat virtually in every single quarter. You're going to be a caregiver multiple times in your life, and at some point you're going to receive caregiving. I recently came back from the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregiving, where Rosalind Carter famously quoted that everybody's going to be one of the four kinds of caregivers. Either they're going to have been a caregiver, be caregiving, receive caregiving. It's a fact of our life, and we don't recognize it enough, and we're not supported enough in that stage. And that's why I'm very excited to be part of the Pivotal Ventures initiatives on trying to transform caregiving for older adults in the United States. They've invested in an incubator, basically an accelerator in Washington, D.C. to help young companies who have great solutions that all of us could take advantage of in our caregiving years. But in these different quarters, you're going to be rethinking what you're going to want to do, and particularly the third quarter. We're going to be discussing today about what does it mean to repurpose, relaunch, reset your life priorities, create a portfolio of opportunities, perhaps become a sidepreneur, or olderpreneur is a new term. Optimizing your health is going to be a priority. And as I want to just point out, this is just an example. New stages, I think, are going to be added along the way.
Let's break this down, Susan, because I
Sure.
found this to be extremely helpful. Just looking at life from a developmental stage. And of course, I can think of myself, at least by age, I'm somewhere between Q2 and Q3, but it helps me also think about my children.
Yeah.
As I think about, what does it mean for me as a parent to, be a positive influence in the starting and the growing and the first launch and the experimenting. I mean, this is language that we might not otherwise use to say, let's talk to our kids about what it means to launch and what it doesn't mean to launch. You're not alone, but there is a launch, and there is something about taking risk and about experimenting. Because I think so much pressure is put on kids around sort of getting it right now and figuring it all out. And this whole idea that, what are we messaging to our kids about what they're supposed to have figured out in Q1 when we start to look across the spectrum of what their lives are really going to be like. So to me, what comes to mind is what's central and what you've pointed out with each of these stages. Again, Q2, continuous learning, developing financial security, entering into that season of parenting, caregiving, optimizing health. This really is about wellness. This is about, in our language would be, how do we, in order to engage in Q3, I mean, Q3, you thought you were going to retire. Turns out it's the biggest quarter. Excuse me, it's the biggest quarter. And then legacy, we have got to have a commitment in order to move through these phases to in my mind, deep spirituality, deep focus on our collective well-being, tightly connected to community, and continually to ask, what is our purpose, which will change over a lifetime? It could be again and again and again. So the notion that you're supposed to have it figured out and live a particular way is not only wrong, but it's dangerous, isn't it?
I
And
totally agree.
I mean,
totally
it's dangerous to think, and what we do to ourselves, the pressures that we put on ourselves, that's something we really need to rethink. And
I
we
want
need
to
to,
echo that from the students that I meet that I teach at the business school to my own children and their friends. I hear that they put so much pressure on themselves to do everything by the time they're 35. I have to
right.
be a CEO by 35 and have enough retirement savings, and then I can have kids. And it's just not the way, it's not right. If we have this 100-year life, we should be spreading this gift, not just tack it on at the end. And
It seems to
uh,
me, rather than being defined by absolutes and timelines, we need to be defined by curiosity, support, grace, and love, to make room for us to go through these different experiences. There's a sort of, as you say, there's a kind of literacy that we need about these various stages. And then we need to appreciate that along the way, as you articulated in your own journey, that there are going to be things that come up that are not on the map, so to speak, whether that's issues of illness or relationships that change, or careers that any number of different things that happen along the way, health concerns, on and on. There's a lot. And, so what does it mean for us to, particularly at Christ Church, to be a place of grace, of love, a place of curiosity, but nevertheless one that uses this kind of map as a framework for thinking about life, for thinking about faith, and for thinking about moving more deeply into what is our sense of calling and purpose, and not having to define that. I mean, so much of, I think, what we deal with is a kind of performance anxiety, sort of an unhealthy striving. And one could look at this map and say, okay, I need to I mean, how many people have already screenshotted this? Like, I've taken a screenshot of this, and by such and such time, I'm going to have all things in Q3. I'm going to be fully loaded. Okay. Right. So, yeah. So, say something about this from the framework of grace versus performance anxiety.
Well, what I want to emphasize, not everybody's going to go through every stage, and not everybody's
No.
going to go through it sequentially. This is just examples. And as you said, we're going to be defining new stages. But the real messaging is to let go of the notion that you're defined by your age, and don't let anybody ever put you in a bucket of what you can and can't do based on what your number on your birthday is. But it's really what stage of life you want to be in, and what is your purpose during each of those stages, is what's really important. And as you said, Chip, it changes, and
Yeah.
it requires reflection, and it requires having a support group to
Yeah.
talk out loud about this. I can't say it enough. You cannot do this alone. It's too hard, the work, and it's not fun. And you learn from others. In my own program, people have gone from being lawyers to being high school math teachers. They've gone on to become cartoonists. They've gone on to teach courses and continuing education programs at universities, things that they never thought they were doing. And I collect profiles, and I hope any of you listening have a story to tell about your own life journey. You'll share them with me. This summer in the Wall Street Journal in August, there was an article about a physician, an anesthesiologist, who at age 67 decided to retire and was thinking about what to do next. And he thought about what was his first job. And at age 17, he was a lifeguard. And he decided at age 67 he was going to go back and train to become a lifeguard again. And that's what he's now doing in New Jersey. And that was just a wonderful story. He had to train for it, he had to learn again, get his body in shape. But he didn't let his age define who he was. He let what his purpose was. He wanted to go back to something that brought him great meaning and purpose and joy, and he found it again. And there are many new stories like that that I could go on about later. But I think this could be the most exciting time of your life, is this Renaissance quarter. And the
Well,
research shows that you're in your happiest time of life when you're in your 70s.
well, let's stop screen sharing for a moment, and we'll break into some conversation here because I want to dig into this because it's so exciting. Let's go into that quarter uh, uh, that again, repurposing, relaunching, resetting life priorities. That's pretty terrifying stuff, Susan. And how do we do that? Like we could come into this and go, okay, wow, this is broadening my perspective. This is I'm excited, but what happens about 2 o'clock in the afternoon today when it's
So
sort of
there are
this that
tools.
sets in? And this is what I want to kind of think about what we can do in the life of our community. Um, you mentioned there was something that happened out in was it called Gen Zone?
Gen Space.
Gen Space. Tell us about Gen Space, because I think we're perfectly set up for Gen Space and for being able to, particularly in a deep dive that we'll do with you this coming winter and spring, to come together, to read material, to reflect on material, to go through material with you, to find the courage, with our language, to take the leap of faith. But tell us about Gen Space.
So there's a lot of people thinking about how do we help older adults think about next chapters. There's a lot of companies that are starting about this that I want to tell you about, and there's a lot of communities thinking about that. And one of the most innovative initiatives that I've seen is a group out of Los Angeles, the Wallace Annenberg Foundation, wanted to create a place where older adults could come together, but they didn't want a senior center. They wanted, and they didn't want, a babysitting center. They wanted a place where people were going to create and co-generate with different generations.
Mm.
So they have took over an abandoned parking lot, built a beautiful, magnificent building, glass open on all sides, and it's an intergenerational gathering spot for older and younger to create together, solve problems in the community, create art together, performances, music, learn together. Intergenerational, I think, is the magic drug to longevity. I personally felt biologically changed by my experience for a year being in classrooms during the Distinguished Careers Institute Fellowship, being with people who were in their 20s and 30s, and they were as excited to learn from me as I was from them. And all these mentoring initiatives that you have, hopefully, in your community, you're going to learn as much from who you mentor. And this is one of the most vibrant times of your life. So what Gen Space has done is
Mm.
happening now in different communities. And I can imagine you all could create your own Gen Space where people of different generations come together, learn from each other, create together, solve problems together. Nobody really wants to be in age segregated communities anymore.
Mhm.
Assisted living facilities, less than 1% of the population is living in them in their 60s. And I think it's less than 8% when they're in their 80s. People want to stay in their own communities, maybe not in the same home.
Mm.
They want some more accommodations, but it's in a very opportune time to be creating and solving together. And I hope that might be
Well,
something that.
I love the idea of Gen Space. I mean, some people that are listening know that I love this idea. I love this idea of us being a spiritual home where we can come together and explore content, class, the lifelong learning, and then set the table for these kinds of conversations. But how do you do that if part of what you're wrapped up in is I you know I don't want to be vulnerable. I don't want to. I mean, I've been a successful this. I've done this. I've
Right.
done this. I done the last thing I want anybody to know is that I'm either a rethinking because they might think I'm in a crisis or something or another. Like, how do we give people permission to mark um, a moment in their lives to say, you know, I've loved what I've done, but I either want to do something new or, to your point, I want to be a side entrepreneur. How do we help particularly overachieving people overcome the sort of, some of the potential anxiety or shame
Yeah.
with even wanting to start the conversation?
Yeah, and that's an excellent question. A part of it comes from talking out loud about it with other people who are at space. So being part of a program, being part of Faith Forum, or being part of a community, the program I did, Distinguished Careers Institute, the first one was started at Harvard. It's called the Advanced Leadership Institute. Notre Dame has a program like this, University of Texas. These are proliferating, but they're being created now in local communities as well. There are books, but what's exciting is companies are beginning to recognize this. Companies often, for people who are required to retire, particularly in accounting firms or law firms, have these off-ramp programs. One is called Encore.org, that's now called Cogenerate, where you could do a fellowship program with them, and they place you in a nonprofit where you could use the skills that you've used in your prior career, and then you could launch into something else. There's companies who are helping to do this. There's a company called iRelaunch,
Mm,
where they will find a returnship for you
mm,
for 16 weeks, a company where you may have in the past, if you took a career break, or a company you may want to work in, will upskill you if you've taken a career break and retrain you. And at the end of the 16 weeks, and they're paying you, you decide if you want to work there and they decide. But there are companies also helping you plan your next. And I have a slide later on that lists them. And in the book, there's a long, long list of all these companies. But once again, to your point, it's hard. That's that first step, and you don't want to be alone in it. You
mm.
want to be part of a circle or a support group that we're other like-minded people who are rethinking what's next. And in short time, I mean, not immediately, but I think in the next to 5 to 10 years, it will become the norm that everybody talks out loud about their career breaks. I
Mhm.
thought that's what was so exciting that LinkedIn put this there
Yeah.
on their profile page, because that's a tool that many people are using professionally. And it just says out loud, it's fine to take career breaks. In fact, it's valued. And that was, the good fortune I had. I had 15 career break, and it was valued. It wasn't seen as it diminished me, it enhanced me.
Well, I like the idea of being able to normalize this new knowledge that we have, frankly, or at least promote the knowledge and then normalize the idea that, you know, gosh, if you're 55, 65, 75, and you've worked all these years, it's possible that if you choose to, you could have a whole new career.
Yeah.
Um, eh, or to your point, you could, if career is not what's appealing to you, this idea of a portfolio lifestyle that is filled with, a collection of different things that allows you to have flexibility, but allows you also to continue to be engaged in meaning. Say something more about portfolio lifestyle,
I mean,
portfolio stage.
there's a there are books on portfolio, and doing a number of different things. Most people, when they leave a major career, don't necessarily want to go back to that 40 to 80-hour work week working for one organization. They want more flexibility, they might want more diversity, and picking and choosing what brings you joy and meaning and purpose is the gift of, I think, this Renaissance stage. So I have a portfolio career filled with things that I love, but no one thing is my full-time um, endeavor, and I still want to leave time for family and friends. And you need to make time in your week for friends. It's really, really, really important. You
Mm,
don't need hundreds of friends. There's a lot of great work that's been done by Arthur Brooks, who talks about um, uh, the Dunbar number. You can't have more than 150 meaningful connections, and
mhm.
all we all need is five people we
Yeah.
can rely on. And that five may change. You might have your five from college, then you might have your five during your work career, and you may have a new five after in different stages, but we all need to nurture those relationships that truly matters.
Well, we've spent quite a bit of time talking about this Renaissance stage. Let's talk about legacy
Okay.
for a moment, because I think, again, 75 to 100, we've tended to put on that stage, aging and end of life, right? And certainly aging and end of life come to play. But what do you mean by legacy? Why do you use the word legacy? And for someone 75 and older, we have a number of people in our community, people that are here today that fit that category. Tell me about that stage. What do you think can happen in that stage in terms of meaning, purpose, joy, impact? A lot can.
This is the gift you can give to the people you love, is your wisdom, your values, what you learned in your life course. I can't say that enough. I learned that. I collect older adults. I really do. I didn't have the good fortune to grow up with grandparents, so whenever I've met an older adult, I want to learn from them. I always read obituaries. I want to know what were their life lessons. I love reading biographies for that reason. So you have a gift to give, and it's so important you write it down or have it recorded. And there are companies and services that will do this for you, that will help you write letters to your family. And there are companies that will record your life story. But what are the lessons you want to impart from generation to generation? I can't say that enough, how important that is. And it takes time. And do it before you get sick. I mean, do it when you're planning, but if you are sick, bring somebody in. And I had, my younger, one of my daughters interviewed my mother about her life story when my mother was in her 80s, and we're just so grateful we have that recording. There's just so much wisdom and life learning in there, and there's an optimism that comes with legacy.
Yeah, and
It's a natural thing that will happen, but do it as a gift to your family, to the people you love, to your coworkers. It's letting the people you know what they meant to you, what you can mean to them going forward.
I see in our Gen space, right? I would see how it's critical that we have legacy voices in that Gen space. Equally so, people 0 to 30. Like, the key thing about the Gen space, where we can come together and reflect, tell stories, think about the future, about what the world can be, our place in it, whether we want to restart a career, whether we want to develop a portfolio, is having those legacy. I'm like you. I've been blessed by a lot of mentors that are older than I am, and that has been life changing and sometimes life saving for me. So, well, we're at the 10:50 mark here. And I wish we had, 20 more hours, but I think we're going to have more hours, you see. And so let's think about this. Everybody that's listening, think of this as a primer for what's to come, because Susan has offered to do a deep dive with us, which will be providing more information to look further at these different stages and really the work that we need to do in the life of our community. As I've said to you, Jesus said, "I've come that you might have life and have it abundantly." What does that mean? I think it means something different for every single person. And Susan, what I'm so grateful for is how you have dedicated your life to this work, and you've lived it personally. You've created so much valuable information that, frankly, I think we just need to let it sink in. We need to be able to think about it, explore it, and we need to set up the conversation, right? But Christ Church, let's think of ourselves as a community on a journey, blessed with gifts. Let's discover what those gifts are. Let's discover what our heart's telling us about what we hope for. Let's name some of the fears of what happens if I talk about this, but let's normalize talking about it, because there's a good chance there's so much more life left for us, whether that's hours, days, years to come. And that's a gift. That's a gift that's been given to us. And what we do in return is our gift to God, our gift to the world. And isn't it exciting to think about not just living a long life, but living all the days of your life by exploring, going deeper, and putting well-being at the center of it all. Susan, I cannot thank you enough for this time. Thank you for writing this book. And I look forward to being in touch with you in the next couple of weeks as we set up this deep dive experience, which will ultimately serve to help us launch some kind of Jen's conversation, maybe eventually Jen space, that helps our people become fully alive to who they are.
I'm so excited to know you.
I'm excited to know you, and I'm excited to take this journey. So thank you so much, Susan.
Thank you for listening. We invite you to subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, and connect with Christ Church Charlotte on social media. If you'd like to attend a Faith Forum live, visit christchurchcharlotte.org/Faith Forum to view dates and details of upcoming talks.